my name is Mike James. I work for Xamrin. There's myself and Matt Larson here today from Xamrin as well. So if you have any questions, then feel free to grab one of us in one of the breaks or after the event. So I'm here today to talk to you about Xamrin and cross-platform development, and I'll first give an introduction as to my background and how I got into mobile development. So I worked for a company in London that developed cross-platform lighting control systems. And we were a QT house, so it was cross-platform all the way. And it was an embedded lighting controller that ran on an ARM processor. So we had a little touchscreen interface to try and make it easier for homes. But we also had the DIN rail unit. And these were installed into big architectural installations such as the London Eye. The user interface primarily was kind of MIDI or RS-232, and that's how you'd interface with these boxes. But as kind of iPads and iPhones exploded, we were like, there's definitely an opportunity here to control the London Eye and lots of expensive luxury flats from your mobile device. So that was kind of my task. I had an opportunity to investigate all the different solutions that are available to us. Because we were a QT house, we knew it had to be cross-platform. We knew it had to be responsive. So I went through and I tried Centred Touch and jQuery Mobile. They're a bit lackluster. They didn't really provide me with what I wanted, and it certainly didn't please my manager. So I knew what I wanted. I wanted a productive environment, and that's like Visual Studios. That's where I'm at home. We had VS in the business, and I'm sure you guys all use Visual Studio and just know how awesome it is. So to go into a text editor and start writing HTML and JavaScript from kind of C++ and the .NET kind of side of things with Visual Studio, it felt like a real step backwards. So this productive environment was really important. As was being able to share code. As I said, we knew we wanted to hit all mobile platforms, so that was Android, iOS, and WinPhone. But we didn't want to have to write the app numerous times. We wanted it to be native and high performance. Obviously, these little lighting controllers, they're outputting data 44 times a second to control the lights. So they're a fairly high performance little device. And when you're moving your colour wheel around, you expect the lights on the London Eye to change with you. We didn't want to have a performance hit for the fact that we would go with a browser option. So I did lots of Googling to try and find the tools that would best suit me. And I came across Xamarin. And I talked to people, and I read the Xamarin documentation, and I just kind of had a poke around, and I was like, I think this might be the silver bullet for what we're trying to achieve. So I downloaded the tools, and I got started. And numerous companies that were already using Microsoft kind of confirmed to my manager just how awesome the technology was. So when you show that to your manager, it's pretty easy to get them to allow you to spend a morning investigating. So yeah, I downloaded the Xamarin tools, I got it installed, and that's where the fun really started to start. So I was writing in C#. I've been programming .NET since I was in my teenage years. I mean, I started with VB.NET, don't judge, and then I moved over to C#. So the .NET libraries, to me, feels where I feel most at home, and it's the most enjoyable library to code against. What's awesome about C# is it avoids the pitfalls of other languages like Objective-C, where you can kind of shoot your entire lower body off. We've all been there. And as I said before, I got to use Visual Studio, which was a really important part because I had kind of my setup already installed on my system, and as I said, I didn't want to use a text editor and kind of go back to the 90s or even before. I mean, I'm far too young to be sat in a text editor writing code. I need IntelliSense. I need the help. I call C# a .do language. If IntelliSense stops working and I hit dot and I just don't know what to do, I'll just restart the IDE. I'm sure many of you are the same. It's like, what methods can I use? Right. So yeah, so with Xamarin you're able to share up to 70% of your code across these different platforms. And there's a huge amount of code that's available for you already. A large community on GitHub, and you've got NuGet. So, I mean, I use JSON.NET on almost every project now. It's just one of those things I download straight from NuGet. By using C#, I was able to use all of this existing code, and from all these developers that are far more intelligent than I. So that was a huge, huge bonus for me. So with C# and Xamarin, it meant that I could hit billions of devices from this one shared code base. It meant that I could not only share the C# language, but I could share my skills in the .NET library. Excuse me. Rather dry throat. So the awesome thing with Xamarin is that it supports 100% of the APIs. So with the other solutions such as jQuery or Sencha Touch and PhoneGap, you're not writing against the API, you're writing against their API. So it's kind of their idea of the abstractions that you're allowed to access. And they'll give you some kind of hardware abstractions, but you're not coding against a real API. You don't have 100% access to all of the features of that device, as you do with Xamarin. And we do this by extending and embracing .NET. So .NET came about because Microsoft had their C APIs with WinForms. With Win32, not WinForms. So they had their Win32, and what they did is they created this wrapper with .NET so that you had a kind of magic layer above you, so you didn't need to get into COM. And so what we've done, and through that with bindings, and so what we've done is we've created bindings to iOS, Android, and Mac as well. So that kind of takes a Microsoft approach, but delivers it onto new platforms. So you're probably thinking, well, what are the options available to me today if I wanted to go with the kind of, I've got an app, I've got to get it written quick, what can I do? Well, you have the siloed approach, and this works really well for huge companies. You can kind of start off with iOS app, you know that's the first app you want to ship. So you hire a team of Objective-C developers, you sit them in a room, you give them a specification, and 2 months later they're going to give you an Objective-C app. You go, great, I'm going to ship this. And then people keep saying, oh, I'd really like that for Android. And you go, they're all Objective-C developers and they really don't want to write Java. Right, I'll hire some Java developers. So you go ahead and you get another room and you fill it full of Java developers and they sit there writing lowercase code. And then you ship that. And they're really happy. All your users are like, this is great. The user experience is fantastic, but we'd love a Windows app. You go, right, and you say to the Java guys, would you mind uppercasing a few bits? And they go, no, we're Java only, sorry. You go, okay, let's get some C# developers and let's make a Windows Phone app. And now you've got 3 distinct teams all working on the same problem, but they're doing it separately. So they're reinventing the wheel. They're introducing bugs into the system that you've got to fix across all 3 platforms, and it's just a huge headache. And it's, in my opinion, it's an insane approach to take to mobile development. I wouldn't recommend it, but if you're already in this situation, then as I say with Java, it's nice and easy, just uppercase. And if you've got C# developers, then they already will be at home with Xamarin. So the other solution is this kind of Sencha Touch and jQuery idea that I had to use at my previous employer. So this kind of idea subscribes to the notion that you can create a user interface that looks great on iOS, and it's going to look great on Android, and it's going to look great on Windows. And then someone also will want to run it in their desktop, no doubt, and you're providing a mobile UI on a desktop, and it's all very strange. But it's kind of, in my opinion, the lazy way of delivering an app. It's not really an app, it's a website. You're cheating yourself if you call yourself an app developer with HTML and CSS. From my experience with it, we could ship apps with this. But as I say, the experience that the end user was getting, it just wasn't up to par with what they were expecting. They've got a brand new iPad. As I say, they're changing the dot on the color wheel, and it's flashing as it's refreshing. It's just not an ideal experience given the power of the device and the amount of money that we were charging for apps. So yeah, that's your other option, and of course you put it in and it squirts out all your different flavors of devices, and they can add to that very easily. But it's not native, and so you're forfeiting the customer's experience for the ability to ship very quickly. So the Xamarin approach, the thing that drew me to the Xamarin approach was this whole concept of this shared back-end code with native user interfaces on top. So you would write your shared code to dealing with your database, all your networking, all your business logic. That sits in this area here. But then when you're running it on the iPhone, you want to make sure that the iPhone UI behaves as an iPhone user would expect it to. So you go and write your iOS user interface separately to your Android one. And what this allows you to do is share, as I say, this 50 to 70% in most cases. Of course, there are situations where if you're writing a very UI-heavy app, that kind of top section is going to get a bit bigger, just because each platform has different drawing APIs. But if you're kind of doing a run-of-the-mill data entry app, then you can get really high, kind of 70-80% code reuse across all the platforms. And as I say, it's fully native. So these buttons on Windows is a button, it's a button on Android, but it's a UI button on iOS. So you're getting the real user interface, and you're able, with this approach, to use the native tools. So as I said, you kind of have that shared layer, which is the .NET that we all know and love. I'm sure we've all used these namespaces. And how that works with Windows is you have on top your device-specific namespaces, and we map this across to iOS as well. So you have your iBeacons. There we go. So you have your iBeacons, your core motion. I wrote an app that counts your steps, so it uses a core motion step counting API that's available in iOS. So as I say, this approach is against the API rather than their API. So you have access to the whole array of arrays that any Objective-C or Java developer has as well. And speaking of Java, you kind of see this shared level with all the platform APIs above. So anything you can do with Objective-C Swift, the new one, and Java can be done with C# and Xamarin. There's no limitation on what you can create. It's also a really cool feature is we allow for binding. So if you've got an existing project where you've got thousands of lines of Objective-C code, or you've got 1,000 lines of Java code, you don't want to rewrite it to bring it over to Xamarin, but you know moving forward that going with Xamarin is a good solution for your company, then you're able to create a binding project so that you can invoke those methods from C#. So you don't have to throw away everything that you've already done. If you've gone with this siloed approach, you can reuse it. And I would suggest over time trying to go straight to C#, but yeah, binding projects allow for a huge amount of code to be reused. And it runs on 2.6 billion devices, which is just, to me, that's an insane number of devices for my code to be able to run on. I mean, we show some of the devices here, but when I think about C#, I also think about the NetDuino, so it's these tiny little microprocessors all the way up to Azure and anything in between. So coming from a C++ background, and everyone was kind of like, .NET, you can't run it on embedded. Well, you can, and they're like, well, how does it work in the cloud? And it's like, well, you can do that too. I've yet to find a device that a C++ developer says, well, it can't do, and for me to not go, well, actually. So yeah, a huge amount of devices that you can run on. And the question I get asked a lot is about performance. So they say, well, how does C# compare to an Objective-C app on an iPhone in terms of performance? Well, actually, we're the same. So part of our compiling process is we take the code, we go to IL, and then we run it through the same LMVM compiler as Apple. So the end code, ARM binary that's running on the device, is exactly the same as an Objective-C one. So you haven't got a performance hit there. We do all ahead of time compilation for that. On Android, it's a slightly different story. On Android, we're able to JIT. So we kind of sideload our own runtime, which is mostly faster. I don't want to say it's always faster, because that would sound arrogant. But it's mostly faster. So performance really isn't an issue running on these devices. And so, I'm not sure if you're aware, but Xamarin actually has two distinct products. So we have the platform, which I'm here to speak to you today about, and we also have Test Cloud. For those of you who don't know what Test Cloud is is a UI automation platform. So it allows you to upload your APK or your iOS app and tell it you want to run some UI tests. So we all know unit testing, and we run our code and we say, yeah, I haven't broken it this build, but you pop it into the App Store and then a million customers give you 0-star reviews because they press the button and it turns white and they can no longer see it, or something specific to the UI goes completely wrong. Well, with Test Cloud you can test this. So you upload your app to it, and then it's going to go through the app's buttons, and it's going to work its way all the way down and then back up the UI hierarchy. And it's going to keep testing and prodding bits on real physical devices sat in a warehouse in Denmark. So what it means is that if you're pressing a login button and it crashes, but only on a Nexus 7, then it's going to tell you that a Nexus 7, you need to start having a look at your code because it doesn't work on that device. So as I say, we've got hundreds of physical devices in this warehouse in Denmark. It's an insanely powerful tool. We had one customer that we're demoing this to, and they're a grocery store. And on a particular device, it didn't show up as a physical error because the app hadn't crashed. But they were just looking through because it takes screenshots as it's going through. They were looking through and they realized that the berries had become very squashed in one of the pictures. So they're able to spot, it's not really a bug, but it's definitely something that needs to be addressed because they're shipping an app to a particular device where the UI images just don't look right. So that's Test Cloud. That's in beta at the moment and coming soon. But as I say, we're here to talk about the platform. So without further ado, let's do a demo, if the demo gods are with us. Right, here we go. That seems more positive. I just needed to trick it into thinking I was going to force close. And it started behaving. Right, so this is a basic Android app. Clearly missed a P on the spelling of the project, but alas. So this is Visual Studio as you know and love. And with Android, all of the magic kind of happens in this resources folder. Have any of you developed for Android using Java or Xamarin before? Okay. Is that hands for Java? Ah, so it's all Xamarin. Oh, there's a few Javas. Okay. So this resource file folder is where, as I say, all of the magic happens, and you have kind of your drawable, which is your image assets, and then you have your layouts, and then you have your values, which are things like strings or integers. And if you've written a Java app, you can go ahead and just drag the entire resource folder into Xamarin Android. You're going to be able to reuse all of that. We don't do anything special. We're just doing the standard Android UI. I say we don't do anything special until I show you this. So we have a fully integrated Android designer within Visual Studio, which is just firing up now. So it allows you to visually design your UIs how you would a kind of WPF app or a WinForms app, just drag it on and start setting properties. You're able to change the theme, so we can go ahead and see how this would look in a lighter style. And you're also able to set things like alternative layouts. So for example, how would it look on its side? I want to specify that the text button has more padding, for example. And all of this is just standard Android XML. And we know it's Android XML because they mention it every time. So you'll never forget. So my colleague James, who is our evangelist, has written a nice little library that uses the Yahoo Stocks API. So I'm going to use that library today, and we're going to generate this little Android app, and we're going to ask it to go and get us some stock information and display it in the UI, so you can kind of see how this process works. So first things first, let's grab a copy of his library. You wouldn't believe I've given this 12 gigs of RAM. There's my VM. Here we go. So he's created this shared library. So the shared libraries and PLCs are slightly different, and I'll explain that in a bit more detail in a moment, if my computer would respond. So this shared library that he's created is literally just going to go out to Yahoo with a symbol that I give it and go and grab some data, download its JSON, and parse it, turn it into a usable model, and we'll do something interesting with it. Here we go. No one corrected me as I'm randomly clicking on the wrong thing, so thank you. Right. So as I said, this uses JSON, so we're going to need to go and grab a copy of that library. So NuGet or NuGet, here we come. If you've not used NuGet before, it's amazing. It's in Xamrin Studio as well as Visual Studio, and it allows you to go out and get insane amounts of libraries that do really awesome things. And today, I'm just going to use this one. Let's get that installed. Super. So I'm also going to need a copy of system.htp. Here we go. I'm sure there's meant to be a button down there somewhere. Here we go. Blindly clicking and hoping. Super. So this shared project, you might be able to see back there, it doesn't have any references. So the way this works is that the references are inferred from the project that's linked to this. If you've ever done file linking, anyone? Yep, so if you've ever done the file linking, it's kind of like a better way of doing that. It's going to deal with all of the management side of things for you. So yes, it's a slightly different approach to the PLC. But in this example, it works really well. So let's load up the UI and actually start creating something interesting. I think my computer really isn't happy today. As I say, it's normally lightning fast, but clearly something has gone awry. Always the way. Not responding, blimey. So we'll give it a moment to think if it wants to start responding. As I say, I've given it 12 gigs of RAM in the VM, so it should have enough. Let's go ahead and close this, and I think we've waited long enough. So I'm sure you all believe me when I say this stuff normally works flawlessly. So yeah, I'll just fire up Visual Studio and get that project loaded again. Aha. So yeah, we'll be using this shared library, which James has written for me very kindly. And we'll just get this UI designed so I can show you all the exciting features of Android Designer. Success. This looks more promising. Good. So, when you're developing WinForms and WPF and you double-click on a control, it normally takes you to the code behind. Android has a slightly different approach because the UI is decoupled from the code behind. So when we double-click in our Xamrin.Android Designer, we're not going to get the code behind for that item. So you would expect to double-click on this button that I would get the code behind, the button click event, but we don't. We get to edit the properties of that. So in this example, let's do get quote. As I say, we're going to write this little app to go and get this the current stock price of various different businesses. So let's do a search for progress bar. I'm going to add that in there. And this is probably all looking very familiar to anyone that's done drag and drop UI design. So I'd like to think that's everyone in the room. Let's go and set some properties here. Let's do a large bit of text. That's looking lovely. Then I want to set its gravity. I tend to scroll past it numerous times before finding it, so shout if you see it. Here we go. I'm going to set that to center. Perfect. And then let's pop plain text in there. And just like before, with a double click, you would expect it to do something. But with this example, it's a text field, so we're going to enter some information in there. So let's do Microsoft. Super. Let's go ahead and set that to 0.00. So you kind of see the basics of an app there. We've got a progress bar, we've got a button, we've got a label, we've got a text field. So we're going to enter some text into the text field, the name of the company. So in this case, it's going to be Microsoft, but we can change that to Google or Facebook at runtime. Hit get quote. It's going to use James's lovely library to go out and fetch some data, bring it back, and update the UI. So let's actually go ahead and look at the code behind for this. So first things first, we're going to want to use this library, so we're going to want to import that. So let's go to Add Shared Projects, because this is a shared project. So as I mentioned before, it's going to use the references that are in the main project. So if I hadn't included system.json and system.http, it would be very upset with me, and it would give me a little red line to tell me that I needed to import those into the master project. So now we've got that library, we should be able to go stock shared view models. Let's create an instance of that view model. Zoom, yes, of course. Let's try and find the options. This is a good start. Let's have a look. Ooh. Oh, here we go. Yeah, okay. We can do it this way. Is the 150 usable? Yeah? Are we happy? I can go bigger? Bigger? Let's try 200. Oh, blimey. Right. We might need to pull these in a bit. So breathe in. Super. Can we all see at the back? Super. Okay, where was I? Right, so I'm creating a new instance of this model. So this model has got all the code for getting the quotes. So now that we've got that, we're going to want to couple this back-end code with the UI. So as I mentioned before, the UI is very decoupled from the code behind. So you can see here we've got a button and we know what its ID is. So in order to use it as a C# button, this is the same with Java, by the way. This isn't something that's unique to Xamrin Android. We need to go ahead and tell it find view by ID. So we're going to do that for all the controls we just added. I happen to remember what they're called by default, but let's just double check. So yes, it's things like My Button, Text View 1, and obviously you can change those to whatever you'd want. But in this case, we'll just power on through. So I'm going to use a var keyword, because why not? So let's do symbol. Symbol equals find view by ID. And the symbol is an edit text field. So resource ID. Yes, and here's what I feared. So it's going to be edit text 1. Now I know that's going to be the case, but we'll just build it just to make sure. Super. Var quote label equals find view by ID. And that's going to be a text view. So you can kind of see what we're doing here. It's kind of boilerplate code so that we can actually talk to these items that are here. And then what have we got left? We've got the progress bar. So progress bar equals find view by progress bar resource ID.progress bar 1. Super. So now we can actually use these UI controls that are in our UI designer. We can start to do some interesting things. So what we want to do is change this, because we don't just want to count up a value on every button click. So let's change that. Okay, so progress bar dot visibility equals view state dot visible. So what I want to do here is just kind of set that when I press the button, I want to have the progress bar start doing things. And earlier on in the properties for the progress bar, I set it to be indeterminate. So it's just going to always do that fancy animation as it kind of scrolls across. So as I say, I know when I click the button, I want it to start scrolling across. And when I finish all of the code in the middle, I want it to stop. So I've just kind of added that there. And we want to check this symbol. No, let's do string dot is null or white space symbol dot text. Yes. Quote label dot. Ooh. So I want to say that's invalid. So if they've hit end or hit get quote and they've not provided any information in order for this to be a valid request, and we're just going to show an invalid in that little label. And let's make sure that that progress bar stops or is invisible. So view state dot invisible, and let's return. Super. So now we want to get the quote. So this is the magic of that lovely library that my colleague wrote, Mr. Mognamanto. Mr. James we'll go with. Mognamanto. I can't say his name all of a sudden. Yes. So we're going to use our view model, which has got the get quote method. So get quote, and it needs to be passed in the value of our text field. If we look at the get quote method, we can peek into this. You see it's asynchronous, so it's not actually passing back quote, it's passing back a task of quote. So we need to make this asynchronous. So let's do await, and let's do async delegate. Lovely. Now if quote equals more than null, then we're going to want to do quote label.text equals quote.current price. current price. IntelliSense has failed on me, or I've got something disastrously wrong. Quote label. Let's just back it up. Current quote plus, and let's also pop on the price change. So I think that's change. Let's see if that compiles. Yes, here we go. Here we first problem. So using lowercase. Anyone think I'm writing Java? This is Android. Please forgive me. Right, there we go. So let's also do some color stuff. So let's do set text color. And we're going to make this so quote is up. So if the stock price is up, let's go ahead and make this green. So we'll do color.green, or if it's not, then we'll want to do color.red. So it's going to complain that the color namespace hasn't been resolved because it's part of the Android graphics. So that's all looking dandy. So we can probably go ahead and now run this on our emulator and see what it looks like. So if you're doing any Android development, I highly suggest you get a physical Android device. The emulators are a little slow, and that's a big understatement. The Genymotion is substantially faster than the default flavor, but yeah, it doesn't compare to running it on a physical device. So as I said, if the demo gods are with us, this will work. The internet was a little slow earlier, so it takes a bit of time for it to go and get the data and bring it down. Let's just try Google. One extra O.
Seems like you're offline.
Yes, it does. You're quite right, down in the bottom. Let's have a look. Yes, that would be a spanner in the works for using web queries. Oh, thank you. There we go. Right, let's ask it again. There we go. So it did it eventually. As I say, the internet's quite slow when it works. So that's just gone off and got the Google stock price, and it's up 6.31%, which is good, I guess. Let's see what Microsoft is at. Let's hope it's up. Oh. I'm sure it will be up in a minute, because we can just keep hitting this and it will keep updating with the fresh data from Yahoo. So let's do Facebook as well. Let's see where they're at. So you kind of, they're also up. So you kind of get this idea of UI designer. You drag on the controls just like you would any normal system like WinForms or WPF. And then you write your code behind, and you can use all these lovely keywords like async and await, and you have all of the lovely C# features that you know and love available to you. So that's it on Android, but I think we should look at it on iOS. So how would we bring that to iPhone?
How
Yeah, I can show you that here, or I can show you that in iOS. Which would you prefer?
Android.
Android.
Debug everything but Apple people.
Right, let's pop some debugging in. Let's whack a breakpoint in there. So of course our debugger works as you would expect. You pop a breakpoint in, it's going to hit the breakpoint, it's going to stop. You're going to be able to interrogate the values and then decide what to do from there, if you want to skip over or jump into. So we're just going out and getting that quote. There we go. So we can now interrogate the value of quote, see what's happening in here. We can even just add these to watch so that we can see them all the time. So yeah, this works exactly the same way that you would write any other C# and .NET app. There's nothing unique to debugging on Android or iOS in particular. It all just works. So yeah, and so now we can continue with that, and the UI should be updated. Still not gone up. We'll see later. So yeah, that's Android. Let's move on to iOS. Sorry?
If you change the ID in the Visual Editor, does it refactor your code?
That's a very good question. Shall we try it? I don't think it would, but let's... Very good question. Let's set that to text view. As I say, because they're quite decoupled, I'd be very surprised. Yeah, so it hasn't. Because of this separation between the UI layer and the code behind. So if we do that, then it would now work. But you'd have to go through and manually change that. So let's create this for iOS. Let's try and zoom in. Oh, the Zoom It tool is working well. In fact, my whole VM is working well. So for those of you who can squint, you can see we've kind of got iPad, iPad storyboard, iPhone, iPhone storyboard, and then we've also got Universal. And Universal is different to kind of the Windows Universal story. Universal for iOS just means that it's the same app that's running on iPhone and iPad. And you get two versions of the storyboard to load, so one unique for the iPhone and one unique for the iPad. But in this example, let's go ahead and create a iPhone storyboard, a single view. Let's call this stocks.ios. Whilst that's loading, I'm going to quickly... Good. So I've got my notes on my phone here, which is what I've been glancing down at. But as expected, something's gone awry. Good. Okay. Well, let me talk you through what we've got with this iOS project. So if you've ever done an iOS project with Objective-C, you know you've got your app delegate. We've got that too. With Xamrin iOS. So this is your main entry point into the application. And you've got your storyboards. So we were using the Xcode interface builder to design our UIs for a long time. That's how I started when I started using Xamarin. It's kind of, you drag a control on and then you hold down a button and you start drawing blue lines everywhere into header files, which is an outlet or an action, and then it goes into some C# magic that Xamarin deals with. So it wasn't the greatest experience for our customers, and often you would save your work in Xcode, you come into Xamrin Studio and you'd have to wait like 5 seconds whilst it notices the changes and then updates all the glue code for you. So we're like, how can we make this better? And the idea came about of, well, we've got an awesome Android UI designer that's been shipping for kind of 2.5 years. Let's make an iOS designer that's equally as awesome and is UI design for iOS how it should be. None of this blue line nonsense. So that's what we have. We've been shipping this for a while on Xamrin Studio, but with 3.0 Xamarin launch, we brought this to Visual Studio, so all you guys can use this as well. One note with this is that you will need a Mac. I'm actually, as you've probably noticed, running in a VM. You don't have to do it this way. You could have a Mac Mini sat in a cupboard that's your build host, because all of the building and distribution happens from the Mac, because we use, as I say, the same tools that Apple uses to generate these binaries. So it's a prerequisite. You will have to have OS X running somewhere in your offices in order to make use of all this fancy UI designing tools that we've generated. So just like with Android, we've got the options to zoom in, zoom out. We can change what versions we're running. We can change the orientation and see how that all looks. But we probably want to start adding controls. So just like with Android or WinForms or WPF, we're going to search and we're going to say, right, I want a button. Let's set the property there to quotes. Going to want a text field. So this is where we're going to enter in our company name. And we're going to want an activity indicator view. So this is kind of like the iOS progress bar. I mean, I could put a progress bar in, but because it's indeterminate, it doesn't have that fancy animation that Android has. So we're going to want something that's just spinning. Otherwise, a 50% progress bar isn't a great UI design. Although, judging by my ability to line things up today, I don't think this is going to be winning any App Store prizes. So we've got our button. We're going to want a label on here as well. Super, right. Now, just like with Android and every other UI designer that has been made by sane people, you can go in and just start editing properties. Let's set this in the middle. I believe Helvetica is currently the trendy font. So let's try and be hip. Let's go even cooler and go with thin. There we go. Stunning piece of UI design, even if I say so myself. Let's bump that up as well. So the really awesome thing about this is this concept of the code behind it, how easy it is to get into. Here we have, well, let's show you another example. Let's drag on a navigation controller. I'm just going to drop that there. Let's move that over there. Let's move this over here. So I've got my view controller here. Let's grab these and actually pop them in here. I mean, that was a brave move. Let's zoom in so I can make some sense of this. So you can see it's just a case of dragging this new view controller and navigation controller onto the plan. I can just copy and paste my controls really easily and just get them in the perfect position. That's good enough for jazz. So let's go ahead and move this to here. So we're going to set, this is now our root. It's got this view controller within it. We can go ahead and delete this because I don't want that anymore. Oh, let's actually delete that. So as I've been saying, the code behind is a really awesome feature. So if I go and give this view controller a class name, kind of watch what happens over here. Let's say stop view controller. So not sure if you all saw that, but it's gone ahead and it's generated the code behind for me, which means that now when I'm in the storyboard, I can go ahead and select things like the button. Let's give that a name of quote. And when I double click this, it's gone ahead and it's generated the code for a tap event. So I can just start writing my code within here to deal with when a user touches that. Whereas on Android, you saw I had to write lots of code to kind of bind those two things together. So just like on Android, we're going to need to bring in some references because we're using this shared library. So it's the same references. We're going to want HTTP. We're going to want NuGet. So JSON. There we go. The internet appears to be very slow today. Right. So let's get that installed. And then once this is installed, we'll go ahead and reference that shared library that we were using on Android, which contains all of the magic for getting data from the Yahoo APIs. Right, so now if you don't have this view in Visual Studio, it's actually a plugin that you can download. If you just type shared into the add-in repository within Visual Studio, you'll find this. That's that added. So we're now in a position within our code behind here to start using, let's zoom in, to start using that library. So we're going to want to do using stocks, .shared, .viewModel, so stock view model equals new. And it should all kind of start looking familiar to you. Let's see if I can get my notes up, because that would be much appreciated, computer. Bear with me one moment. Here we go. Success. Super. So just like on Android, we want to start off with things like the progress bar. So what is that doing? Well, in this case, it's our activity spinner, but we haven't actually named it yet. So let's pop back into our UI designer, and let's give that a unique name. So let's call it progress bar. Let's call that symbol. That's already got a name because we named it earlier, but we'll call this quote label. So they're kind of the same names that we had on Android. So now if we go in here, let's just go ahead and close that. We should be able to go to quote label. We have access to all of those controls from within here. So let's first of all do progress. Progress bar dot start animating. So what that's going to do is that's going to start it spinning round, and we'll, just like before, we want to say at the end, once I'm done with everything, I want you to stop animating, and we'll want to check if the user has passed in valid symbol. So we'll go symbol.text. And let's create a new UI alert view. There's lots of overrides here, but there's only a few we care about. Enter a symbol. Null. Alert.show. And let's return. Super. Let's just confirm it builds. Not sure about you, but I save and build. I'm fairly sure I'm going to wear those keys out first before any others. And it doesn't build. Good. Right, what have I got wrong? Where am I missing a U?
Alert equals new UI alert.
Ah! You're quite right. I thought you were saying you, as in you, rather than you. Yes. Super. So that now still doesn't compile. Good. Where are we? It's this lowercase nonsense. It's slowly destroying my mind. Good. So with iOS, when you hit go on the button, it's not going to hide the keyboard for you. So we're going to have to explicitly tell the view. When we press that, we want to resign the first responder, so we want that keyboard to hide. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to do symbol, resign first responder. Super. So now let's start with the actual magic. I'm going to need to view model, get quote. So this is all just the same kind of code that we were writing for Android, but for iOS. So you can kind of see just how much code you could reuse across these different platforms. And just again double check that it actually builds. Very good. And now we'll do if quote.text. If quote equals more than null, then we want to do quote label.text equals quote.current quote plus. So just like before, we're going to do quote.change. Super. Quote label.text color. And like before, we're going to change the color depending on what's happening. So we'll do quote stock is up, UI color green, and then UI color red. Super. So that's kind of should be our iOS app on par with the Android version. So let's fire that up into a simulator and see what that looks like. Let's set it startup. And so what that build process is now doing is it's sending all of that code over to OS 10. It's going to be building the APK. And it's going to, it's not the APK, sorry, because it's iOS, the app, and it's going to be popping it onto the iOS simulator. Let's close that. So you can see it here. So let's do Google. As I said before, my UI design is quite dreadful. I mean, if I was shipping this app, I would probably try and line things up and set a title. So just like with Android, that's going to go out to Yahoo. We have internet, so this should work. There we go. So Google is still up, and that's the iOS version of the app. But what's really cool about the Xamarin Designer is that you can have custom controls. So when you're dragging and dropping onto that design view, it's not just an image, you're actually rendering a live UI button. And when you have an image, you're rendering a live UI image. So what that means is that if you've got some code that's got some custom drawing methods, you can expose that to our designer and it will render it for you live within the designer. We've got some in the components store already, some components that implement these features, so this browsable feature, and I'll show you this in a moment. So if you haven't used the component store, you can get to it from Xamarin Studio and Visual Studio. Let's see how fast the internet is. But yeah, so it's kind of like NuGet, but there's a lot of UI focus on the mobile side of things with Xamarin. So it's got some great controls in there that will save you a lot of work if you need custom kind of charting, or you want a signature pad, or you want to unlock the app. So the internet's taking a bit too long, so you know where it is. There are components available for all three platforms. The majority, to be honest with you, are iOS and Android within the component store.
Do you integrate other third-party iOS components in Xamarin? For example, logistics, for whatever.
Sure. So some of the components that are actually within the Xamarin Component Store are just binding projects. So just like before where I mentioned, if you've got this kind of huge amount of Objective-C or Java code that you want to access from C#, then you can create this binding project. And if it's usable to other people, then you can put it into the Component Store. So yeah, that's more than possible.
Coming back to the UI components, are they cross-platform then, or are they specific for the platform?
It depends on the component. In the Xamarin Component Store, because it's before Xamarin 3.0 and with Xamarin Forms, what they've done is they've implemented the drawing code uniquely for each platform that they're deploying to. So what that means is for iOS, they've got drawing code for iOS that's using UI views and UI tables and UI buttons, and you get the idea. Whereas with Xamarin Forms, we're going to see a lot more kind of cross-platform across all of the platforms, because it's really been designed that you would create cross-platform for Windows Phone, Android and iOS with your components.
And would you say that doing custom components on our own would be a complex task if they are cross-platform?
Yeah, it's in terms of wrapping it up in a component isn't a complex task. That's fairly simple. I mean, the biggest task is actually going to be developing a control for any particular platform. That kind of depends on how complex the control needs to be. But as I say, because you've got this ability to bind to Objective-C, there's huge amounts of Objective-C UI controls out there that are just phenomenal. So you have all of those available to you within Xamarin. But it wouldn't help you with your cross-platform story. If you wanted to go with the cross-platform route, then you would need to develop your UI control for each platform that you want to run it on. But I can show you an example of a custom control running within our storyboard. So let's go ahead and add this. Let's go to My Stocks. You see we've got one for Android there as well. I'll just use the iOS version for the moment. So this is a simple little bar chart control. You may have seen when Miguel first demoed this designer Evolve last year, he showed a pie chart. Well, it's kind of similar concept to a bar chart. So, and as I say, we've got these attributes which allow it to become browsable, and you can set names, and so you can change parameters within this control from Visual Studio's property editor or Xamarin Studio's property editor. So let's go ahead and reference that into our project. So the solution. Super. So now when we load up the storyboard, we should be able to see something new added to the bottom. So here we go. So that bar chart view there is the code that you just saw me import. So I can just go ahead and drag it on. And as I said before, we're doing live rendering, so this is how it would look on the device. Let's use these little bits to resize it. I can go ahead and change some of the data in there. Let's make that 18. That's now bigger. Oh, I preferred 8. You can change the colours. So you kind of get a feel for what you're able to do, and all of these properties here have just been exposed within the library, and obviously it's redrawing every time you change a property, as it would on the device. So let's change some of these properties. Oh. So we'll give this a name of bar chart. And so I think what might be quite cool is if we hide those. We'll go and get kind of 2 weeks worth of data about the stock price of a company, and then we'll display it in this chart view. That might be quite a fun thing to do. So let's go back into our view controller. So it's going to change a little bit in here. Let's get rid of that. Let's do var. Let's also change that to task, because I want to return a task of it. We'll do history task equals view models dot get a history. Now this is going to need a little bit more information, so we'll pass in here the symbol dot text, and then we're also going to pass in date time dot today dot add days, and we'll do minus 14 because we can go 2 weeks behind, and then we'll do today. Ooh. Super. And we'll want to await all of that. Ooh, task. So I'm obviously missing a namespace. Quote task, and then history task. Let's make sure we've got the namespace for that. Just what I like to see. So then we can go var quote equals quote task dot result. Perfect. Ooh, interesting. Add days, my bad. Okay, so that should resolve that. Perfect. So now we want to use this. As you see, I've defined the history task. We're going to use this now to get the data out of there and then populate this grid view. I shall zoom in. So you can see what I've just added there. It's very simple stuff at the moment. So let's update this. So let's do var items equals history task.result. Now I'm going to want to use a little bit of link here, I think. Let's make sure we've got the so if items equals more than null. So if we've actually got something usable, then let's, with the magic of link, we're going to do some cool stuff. So equals new bar chart dot bar model. We'll do value equals s dot value. That can come up there. Sorry? No, it should be 2 big V's, I think. We'll see in a moment if it doesn't compile. We want to go to list. We want to reverse it because I know that it brings the data in the wrong way. So did you kind of see what I've done there with the link? Because sometimes people don't know about link, and then when you show them stuff like that, they go, oh, what have you done? What is this black magic? Super. Okay, well let's save. Oh, Let's get this running on the device. So there we go. Obviously the default data of the chart is just whatever numbers I typed in earlier. Let's actually get it to go and get some data. So it should now be querying Yahoo. Although, yes, you're quite right, it's not spinning. Let's put some breakpoints in. Let's see, do we get into there? Let's just go and restart that. Let's do Facebook. Let's see where they're at. Okay, so we're hitting that. I trust it's doing it. We shall see if the... there we go. I think I did see it spin, perhaps. Or I'm imagining it. I'm not on the internet again. Good. What can you do? So you can kind of see that the view that you saw within the iOS designer is exactly what we're seeing here on the simulator, which would be exactly what you would see on the real device. If the internet starts behaving, I'd love to show you this working. There we go. The spinner is spinning, it is fetching data. Touch wood, this will just work. And so we wait some more. Let's see. So it did it. It just took a while. So you see the chart has updated for us. We can go ahead and do Microsoft. Maybe it'll be a bit quicker. There we go, a bit quicker. So you can see just how easy that is to create lovely little Android and iOS apps. So now would probably be a good time to have a break. So
Just have another question. So how do you do some kind of data binding? Because you actually assign all directly to the controls.
yeah, so data binding, there's numerous different ways to do data binding within Xamarin Android and Xamarin iOS. You can use tools like Xamarin Forms if you wanted to do cross-platform with data binding, and there are other libraries that are available on our component store to help you with that process, but we don't have anything uniquely just for data binding within Xamarin iOS. You can follow the kind of principles of iOS and Android if you want, or you can use these third-party libraries that kind of make it a bit easier for you.
But coming from XAML, it's very easy to say curly brackets binding.
Absolutely, and as I say, if you're using Xamarin Forms, then we've got two-way data binding, so that's done for you. So what I've shown you here would kind of be the pre 3.0 launch. So this is how you would go ahead if you've got that one team of developers, your iOS guys, and you know you want to target iOS to start with, then you would probably write your app this way. If you knew from day one that you wanted to target all mobile platforms, then you might want to choose Xamarin Forms, and then you've got the data binding straight in there with no extra libraries. And as well with XAML, with Xamarin Forms. Any other questions?
Can you also debug directly on the device with iOS?
Absolutely. So you can debug with Android, iOS, Windows Phone, all of them. There's no difference between it running in the simulator and debugging on the real device. I would always suggest running your app on the real device for iOS especially. I think the important thing to remember with the iOS simulator is it's using the full resources of your computer. So if I'm sat with just kind of Xamrin Studio running and it's taking 2 gigs of RAM, I've kind of got 8 gigs sat there for the iPhone simulators to use if I wanted. So if I've written some utterly dreadful code, then it can potentially use 8 gigs of RAM, and I can go, oh, it's very responsive on the simulator, and then you run it on a device and you're waiting 3 weeks for a button to do something. So always run on the device, just as kind of a test. But yes, you can debug on the device as well. Any other questions? Super. So shall we take 15 minutes, get some drinks, and I'll be floating around if anyone wants to grab me for a quick natter.